Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast. Together we dive into the world of sci-fi and science fiction. From episodes of Star Trek, Star Wars, to The Walking Dead, Resident Evil, all the hot new science fiction movies from the back doors of Marvel or DC. The Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast. You'll never look at science fiction the same way again.
Hello. Thank you for tuning into the GSMC Sci-Fi Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Alex Fry. Today, we're going to be talking about some beloved shows from the past. I don't know about you guys, but I'm going to go out on a limb here and say sci-fi was probably just as formative for you as it was for me growing up and still is to this day. I used to watch a lot of sci-fi shows with my parents and by myself, so it was a bonding activity and just something I really enjoyed. And also how it's changed a little bit as I've gotten older. I used to just mostly be about the stories, and now I care more about the things that are left unsaid and how they use music to really indicate the underlying emotions of the scenes and the true motivations of the characters, depending on the show. I think that's a lot of fun in addition to checking out like the messages of the shows. So today we're going to start off talking about Voyager for a little bit. We're going to talk about Jessica Jones, the Firefly and Dune rumors and what's true and what's not, as well as a little bit about Stargate and lessons I've learned from sci-fi. First up, we're going to talk about Voyager. So Star Trek Voyager, I did not appreciate it when I was a teenager and it was initially on. I am turning 31 this week, and so that will give you the rough age I was when Voyager premiered. And I didn't love it. I don't know what it was that really turned me off. I remember I didn't like 7 of 9 that much, but now as an adult, I really love her. It was just a lot different for me from TNG, and TNG was always my favorite. Whereas now as an adult, I'm kind of leaning towards Voyager. It's really hard to decide between TNG or Voyager. So I'm going to put them both in my number 1 slot. But we're just going to focus on Voyager a bit today. I recently read Kate Mulgrew, who played Captain Janeway. I read her memoir, Born with Teeth. And about a good half of it is about her time on the Star Trek set and the things that she learned along the way and the friends that she made. And it was really illuminating. I don't want to spoil anything in it for anyone, so if you haven't checked it out, I totally recommend it. But it was really interesting to get to see how her personality informed who Janeway was and how Janeway also informed who Kate Mulgrew is and how they grew together. I think that type of relationship between the character and the actor is really fascinating, and she did a great job going in depth about that. Also, if you like audiobooks, Kate Mulgrew herself does the voiceover for it, and it is fantastic. Her narration is out of this world. Highly recommend it. I think one of my favorite things about Voyager is Janeway in particular, and how she's stuck in this position of being 70 years out from ever being able to get back to Earth, even at their top speed, going constantly. And she never gives up, but they also have adventures along the way. And Janeway's morals always come into play too. Now, I know we're not going to get too far into shippy stuff right now, but it always bothered me that she just decided she could not be with Chakotay because it was against her values. And I really appreciate that. I totally respect it, but it bummed me out how they play that one out in the show. However, that part aside, I really do love how Janeway has such strength of will and how she's just not scared of anything, really. When she has to fight the fear monster and she goes into the pod to be awake while simultaneously talking to him, her whispers are scarier than just about anything that Sisko or Picard could ever have said. And let's just be honest, no one's afraid of what Kirk has to say. We're just there to watch him get his butt kicked and run his mouth a little bit. He's a lot of fun. However, if you disagree with me or you're upset because I left out Captain Archer in there or Captain Pike, go ahead and let me know in the comments who your favorite Star Trek captain is. And in another segment, we will make an argument for how Jack O'Neill compares up against the Star Trek captains, because I think that it's a great comparison, and he makes a lot of similar types of decisions, but is still a lot different from them. Speaking of decision making, I particularly love how Janeway just goes for it. She's really just like very decisive. I'm not sure that if you believed in the MBTI stuff, if she would be a full INTJ, but Janeway is there to make the hard calls, especially with Tuvix. The Tuvix exercise is one of my favorite philosophical questions. If you guys remember from the show, at one point, Tuvok and Neelix go down to this planet and they come back with this flower. It looks like an orchid or something. And on the way back, the transporter malfunctions and the flower gets merged with both Neelix and Tuvok into being this one singular creature that calls itself Tuvix. And the personalities and the minds of Tuvok and Neelix have melded together at this point, not in the Vulcan mind meld way, just their personalities are one. It's not two separate entities inside of the same body like it would be with a Tok'ra from Stargate, where there's the symbiote and the host that can both speak. But rather, this is just a new creature altogether. And Janeway has to decide what to do about Tuvix. If she destroys this creature to bring her old crewmates back, then she has effectively murdered him, as it is a totally different third or fourth, if you take the orchid into account, creature in this scenario. So it's a new creature, and she ends up deciding that she needs to get the original two people back. Those are the two people who have the rights to live over this new creature, even though it exists now. And it kind of goes back and forth in trying to figure out what she's going to do about it. And ultimately, there are a lot of memes about her choice in this regard, because she just flat out kills Tuvix and goes for it. Let me know how you guys feel about Tuvix in the comments. I'm very curious. I go back and forth on it all the time. I like Tuvix a lot more than I think I like Neelix, but I like Tuvok on his own more. So we really needed Tuvok and Neelix and to get rid of Tuvix. Janeway is also one of my favorites because she just throws that prime directive out the window in regards to the temporal prime directive. Star Trek Discovery is doing that now with throwing the temporal prime directive out the window, but Janeway was a boss about it. She just does not care. She's like, I don't care what Starfleet has to say. Starfleet has no bearing at this point on where we are and what we're doing. This is not something that any of us have any contingency plans for. So I'm just going to do it. And she does. I love that woman. I also love that you can tell like how much of a bind the crew is really in based on Janeway's hair when she still has it in the bun. Like, if her hair is not disheveled a little bit, we're not really in any trouble. But if that bun comes down, oh no, something is horribly wrong with the ship. And you can just tell from screenshots from the episodes that how dire the situation was that they were in. She also makes some questionable moral decisions in the holodeck. I love the episode where Janeway decides to program a love interest, since she's decided she can't be involved with any of the crew on the ship because that would be unethical in her regard. But she starts giving this male character, I believe he was an Irishman, all of these different personality traits and everything, and he seems like the perfect man, but he was programmed to be married. And so she deletes the wife and just keeps deleting things until she's made this whole new environment that she has just immersed herself in and then has to pull herself back out. Another thing that I thought was really fun was her working with Michelangelo. That was a blast for me. It's like, if you could do anything with the holodeck, what would you do with it? And you have Picard doing his noirs. You have Quark and them doing like dubious things on Deep Space Nine. You can really tell the different shows based on what they used the holodeck for at certain points. But I really love that Janeway uses it to kind of, she sorts out who she is in it and how far she's willing to go for certain things because she gets lost in it. But she also has these adventures in indulging her intellectual side. And she's a science officer first and foremost before she became part of command. And I like seeing that curiosity of her in her natural scientist element when she's in the holodeck. All right, guys, I could talk about this all day, but we're going to go on a short break. And when I come back, we're going to talk a little bit about Jessica Jones.
Want to find out what movies to go see? Then check out the GSMC Movie Podcast. It's your ticket to the latest movies, whether it's a new blockbuster event, romantic, comedy, or action flick. This show has got it all covered. They talk some what to go see now. Don't bother. What's hot on Netflix and everything in between. That's GSMCpodcast.com/movie-podcast. When it's all about the movies, it has to be this new show. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Sci-Fi Podcast. Before the break, we were talking about Star Trek Voyager as one of my old favorite sci-fi shows. And now we're going to talk a little bit about Marvel and Jessica Jones. So Jessica Jones is one of my all-time favorites. I love that she is a superhero, but she's not quite entirely super, and she's not entirely a hero by the time we see her in the Netflix Marvel shows. So Jessica Jones isn't coming back for another season. Netflix said that was their decision, not Disney's, but Disney is supposed to be coming out with their own new Marvel shows and their own cinematic universes now that they have Disney Plus. So I will just let you decide what you want to believe about that. Jessica Jones, though, is a lot of fun to me. So, similarly to the Star Wars, Star Trek debate, I think that people tend to compare Star Wars and Star Trek because they're just both people in space and that shared theme. A lot of people, when Jessica Jones was on the air, I saw them comparing her to Supergirl. And I think that in that case, it's just like the Star Wars, Star Trek debate where the only thing they really have in common is women with superpowers and they're orphans. That's about it. The two shows are very different in tone and text. And I enjoy Supergirl a lot, but I do enjoy Jessica Jones more. So why? Well, the reason I love Jessica, and I don't think that I should have to pick between two female superheroes, or even between Star Wars and Star Trek, apples and, I don't even know, what are they, rice cakes, I don't know, apples and rice cakes. They're not even both fruit necessarily, but they are both enjoyable separately. Jessica Jones, though, back to her, is a lot of fun for me because she tackles issues that I care about. Like, she talks about in the context of the show, talks about PTSD, addiction, abusive relationships, racism, child abuse, sexual assaults, culture. Like, they talk about it in an implicit way and an explicit way, and they're used to further her own storyline instead of that of a male character. Now, the reason I bring that up is the whole concept of fridging, in which a female character gets killed or something terrible happens to her in order to further a male character's storyline. Like, you never hear about, like, the experience for her. A lot of times it all happens off screen, and that's kind of a bummer in a lot of ways. I feel like it does a disservice to those female characters. But regardless of your own views on fridging, I do really enjoy how Jessica Jones mostly puts the human aspect back into superhuman, and it's more believable about how a normal person might handle superhero abilities. So in most superhero stories, the gifted character just uses their powers for good or for evil, and they just take it every day with seeming ease in regards to mental health. I also loved how they address that with Iron Man in the recent Marvel Cinematic Universe movies. That was a really big deal for me to see Tony struggle with that, and also see that Jessica doesn't handle it so well. So Jessica and Tony both self-medicated with alcohol, and Jessica is fighting both PTSD and self-loathing. She doesn't always do all of the right things for the right reasons, and she doesn't always do it in a palliative way. Sometimes she gets tunnel vision, but those flaws are why I love her as a character. She hurts, Jessica hates, she makes bad decisions, she makes terrible decisions, and she doesn't always bounce right back up when she's knocked down. Now, I do love Captain Marvel too, because Captain Marvel, Carol Danvers, will always bounce back up when you knock her down, just because, that's who Carol is. It's not like Captain America, where he does it because it's the right thing to do. Carol does it just to get one over on somebody else. She does it out of spite in a lot of ways, and I love Carol for that. So I love these characters for a lot of different reasons, and Jessica and Carol are kind of opposites in several ways, not in all ways. But the thing that I love about Jessica is that, in a way, she's more relatable and believable because of how she handles things so poorly in some ways. None of us are perfect, and I enjoy seeing perfect superheroes. I enjoy Superman and stuff as much as the next guy, but that imperfection is really what draws me in and keeps me watching Jessica Jones. And I know I said that it's more relatable and believable for me, and you guys are probably sitting there going, Alex, it's a superhero show based on comics. Why does it need to be believable? Well, I like a dose of realism with my fiction. That's why I tend to prefer sci-fi over fantasy. I like sci-fi that's really science heavy, to be honest. I do like pretty much all sci-fi, and I do love fantasy, but my preferences for reading and for watching are always going to be sci-fi. I love the scientific elements. I love how it helps you suspend the rest of your disbelief, and keeping Jessica really flawed helps us out a lot here, particularly when Jessica doesn't have those full powers. There's not a ton of science behind it, just car accident, truck, goo on the ground, boom, superhero. Good enough. No, honestly, that's good enough. But this helps balance that out, I think. The flaws help balance out the lack of scientific understanding for my personal preferences. Jessica also doesn't even have full powers. One of my friends finished watching the show the other day, and once he was all caught up, he was like, this girl doesn't even have full superhero powers. She's not very good at being a superhero. And I'm like, yeah, that's why it's awesome. So it stands to reason to me that not everyone with powers would be incredibly powerful. We tend to see the most powerful ones, like Dr. Manhattan, and we have, who should we go for next? Superman. Superman, the classic Marty Stew. He is super overpowered. But that's okay, because there's fun in that too. However, I like that Jessica isn't all the way there. Jessica's strong, but she's not Supergirl strong. She's not Superman strong. A human on performance enhancement drugs can give her a run for her money, at least while she's injured. She can jump far and she can jump high, but Jessica can't fly and doesn't have overall increased agility. Although part of that might just be because she is drunk all the time. But I think that her resonance with viewers is really similar to that, kind of like Batman's. We want to see a semi-normal person who shares characteristics with us and can do something more with their lives. But unlike Batman, Jessica is not rich, which is part of what makes it grittier. And Jessica will also kill her opponents. Batman doesn't like doing that. And I respect Batman, but also people keep getting out of Arkham Asylum. At a certain point, isn't it morally wrong for Batman to not kill the Joker, considering how much collateral damage in human lives and infrastructure he's caused? That's a question for another time. But back to the comparison of Jessica Jones and Batman. She's not super rich, and she's also not out to save the world or even her neighborhood. Jessica is just another person struggling to get by in the city, drinking cheap whiskey, and refusing to see a therapist. If that is not relatable to millennials especially, I don't know what is. Those are just a few reasons why Jessica is my favorite. I love that she struggles with forgiveness as well, and she struggles with family and just interacting with other humans. Jessica does not trust easily. She has seen some stuff. She has been through some stuff. And for her, she just approaches everyone with suspicion. It's part of being a private detective, but also she's a private detective because she doesn't trust anybody. It's self-reinforcing in a lot of ways. Now, we're going to go on a quick break here in a minute. I'm going to get some water, and when we come back, we are going to talk about our next topic, the potential Firefly reemergence.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about Jessica Jones and why she is awesome and underrated in some aspects. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the more rumored reemergence of Firefly. Guys, it is constantly rumored that the show is coming back. I swear, as soon as it was canceled, there were rumors immediately. And then we believed it, and we got Serenity, and we were jazzed about it. And it was a wonderful movie. Don't get me wrong. I love Firefly. I loved Serenity. I spent my 17th birthday watching that show and the movie. Rented them all from the local movie place back when you had to go to an actual rental place to rent a movie. And I'm not talking about a Redbox. If I have any Gen Zers listening, when we were kids, we would have to go to an actual store and rent a physical copy and then take it home. And sometimes it was made out of DVDs, and sometimes it was like a VHS tape. So we watched a lot of those growing up for my birthday. That was my favorite thing to do, was to watch sci-fi with my friends. So we rented Firefly and we rented Serenity a lot at that point, and it was a lot of fun. But I feel like Serenity also gave us these false hopes about Firefly getting remade. I really want more Firefly, but I don't think it's going to happen. Like, they keep rumoring it, and I know recently, all the actors have said, oh yeah, I'm really down for it, and Joss Whedon has always said that he would be down to make more Firefly. It's one of his babies. But all those actors are on all these different shows right now, so if they did do it, I think it would be more of a limited series run, and that's very similar to what a lot of the old Stargate actors have said, from SG-1 in particular, that they would be interested in doing a limited run. Even Richard Dean Anderson has recently said that. Because, everybody's so busy with all their other projects and they're in contracts, so they can't just rip up the contracts. They're not necessarily just for 1 year. A lot of them are multi-year agreements or multi-show agreements that they've made, depending on, if you're on a Marvel show or whatever. So a lot of these, not remakes, but revivals, like the X-Files revival, that have been happening in sci-fi and stuff lately, I really want more of them, but also you never know what they're going to look like now. Everything is different. So where do we land on that? If you have a specific view as to whether you would like Firefly to have a reemergence at this point, or if you think that it wouldn't be the same anymore, let me know in the comments and we can debate about it. I'm still trying to decide. I would love to see it. And I would still totally watch Stargate with everyone older and everything. It's just a matter of how it would be executed, I think, and who all would be involved behind the scenes. Also, they're going to have to rebuild all of those sets because they were all torn down afterwards, which is a big bummer, but you got to make space in the studio. Those lots are needed for other shows and movies to go ahead and film. And then also, anything that you were using to film before on actual location is going to look a lot different at this point. So there's a lot of different factors to keep in mind, I think. I want Firefly back for a limited run. I enjoyed seeing everyone on the X-Files again. That was really nice, and it did not matter to me at all that they had aged since then. I love it. I think it's perfectly normal for people to age, and we should see more realistic aging in TV shows. So that part didn't bother me at all. I don't know. We're going to see where it goes, you guys. You also have to think about where they're going to pick up with it. Is it going to be 2 characters in a new location with new problems? Is it going to be a prequel? What kind of story would you want to see for it? I would be bummed personally if Wash wasn't in it, and he can't be in it if it takes place after Serenity for obvious reasons. It's a big bummer, but it is what it is. He's a leaf on the wind. Watch how he soars. Moving forward, what would you really want it to look like, though? Because I'm not sure what I would want it to look like. The Reavers are mostly gone at this point. I always found them to be very fascinating because they were exceptionally grim and gritty. And I love that Whedon tied that back into really being sci-fi in the movie by, of course, he only had like 14 episodes to begin with to really tell his story. So that's not on him. But I love that he made it exceptional sci-fi by giving a background to why there were Reavers and also making it very scientific and another warning of how government overreach can occur when they are experimenting on their citizens. Governments all over the world have historically done that. The U.S. experimented on women in, I think it was Puerto Rico, by giving them birth control that had never been tested on anyone before when they first were wanting to roll out birth control. And a lot of these women had a lot of medical issues with it, and about 18, I believe, died, but no one ever investigated it because it was just a secret project. They've done that with Tuskegee Airmen. A lot of people, especially if you're into sci-fi, you're probably familiar with that and have, seen how government overreach in sci-fi is a big theme. And also, pollutants and everything. So I really enjoyed that they were just trying to calm down the population, and it horribly, horribly backfired when they had such a large sample size as the planet of Miranda. And they just pumped it all into the air, packs like Paxil, just meant to keep people calm. And then that small percentage just had a side effect that made them completely violent. I thought that was fascinating and a great way to bring that in. I also really loved the bad guy from it. He was one of my favorites, where he is trying to create a more moral world, but he knows that in doing so, it disqualifies him completely from being a part of this world that he's trying to create. It's very paradoxical and ends justifying the means type of way. He was a fantastic villain in that respect, and one of my all-time favorite sci-fi villains. Now, I know that he would not necessarily be able to be in those sequels, but I would like to see more, I think, about the government overreach and the other studies they might have been doing on people. So, River was also a government product where they experimented on her, and she was able to take out all of those Reavers. I think it would be really interesting to kind of explore this theme of how the government is researching unethically on people, and, why we have research standards in, the actual real world. It's a really cool kind of comparison to that. Sci-fi is one of my favorite genres specifically because it tends to be a mirror to the real world, or an extension of, hey, if we keep doing this thing, or if we tried to do this thing that might sound like a good idea, this is how it could go horribly wrong. Sci-fi has always been really great at predicting change sociologically, also technologically, and that is absolutely fascinating to me, particularly when it's dystopic in nature. I really love a good dystopian story, especially when it is married with sci-fi. So if Firefly came back, I wouldn't necessarily want more. A lot of people argue for like a brown coat story and more wars, and I'm really interested in that too, but more of a background story, kind of how they weave in parts of the shipwreck and all the sharks in the graphic novel of The Watchmen. I would like to kind of see something like that. I like flashbacks of the war with the brown coats and everything, but I would want to see more about the government experimentation and whether they've been doing that anywhere else. I mean, River had these memories of it embedded in her brain from seeing it in the little bar that they were in, and I want to see what other crazy stuff they were doing. That's one of my favorite things from the Star Wars Extended Universe too, was the Maw installation and how Admiral Dalla was in there doing research and everything. Terrible research, but just like in Firefly, they were also doing terrible research, and I want to see how far-reaching that goes and in what other forms it would take. So that's kind of where I'd want to see a limited series of Firefly returning go. All right, guys, we are going to go on another quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about the Dune rumors.
Watching TV has changed over time. Streaming has become the new norm. That's why Golden State Media Concepts television podcast dives headfirst to the world of cord cutting. Want to be on the loop of what's hot in Netflix? Or if it's not a preference, what about original shows in Hulu? We've got you covered. Join us as we fill in the blanks and talk about movies to stream and what show you should be binging. This is the Golden State Media Concepts television podcast.
welcome back. In our last segment, we were talking about the possibilities of Firefly coming back as a limited series, and if it did, what we would kind of want that to look like, the types of storylines we'd be interested in seeing. It's not necessarily coming back, but everyone has said that they're interested in it, unlike Dune, which is coming back now. So Dune has been under a few different remakes over the years and a couple different attempts, really. I liked both the David Lynch one and I enjoyed the SciFi version where they did Dune and Children of Dune. I liked both of them in different ways. I also enjoyed the books. So I kind of just think of them as alternate universes or alternate expressions. They're all going to look very different, and I enjoy the different artistic takes on it. The next one that's coming out is going to be by Denis Villeneuve, and I practiced saying his name a little bit. I'm sorry if I butchered it. I'm going to keep trying and keep practicing until I get it right. But he is working on one right now with Timothée Chalamet and Oscar Isaac. Oscar is going to be playing Duke Leto Atreides, and Timothée Chalamet is playing Paul. It looks like a really good cast. I know Stellan Skarsgård is supposed to be playing Baron Harkonnen, and Stellan has like this really just underlying creepiness about him when he wants there to be. But this is going to be super overtly creepy, so I'm interested to see how he's going to do that. I know he's going to pull it off flawlessly. I'm just excited to see like how he envisions it and how he combines that with the director's vision. Because Baron Harkonnen is one of the most fascinating characters. He's a terrible person. He's like one of the worst people in all of sci-fi, I think, in all of sci-fi literature. He's one of, if you had to make a top 10 list, he's up there. But he's also very fascinating. As I mentioned in Firefly, I'm really fascinated by villains. And with me mentioning Jessica Jones, anti-heroes. So I'm stoked to see what he does with that. Now, I've been getting a lot of, not necessarily information, but enjoyment out of this Facebook group for Dune called Muad'Dib's Spicy Memes for Bene Gesserit Teens. I don't know if you guys are a part of that group, but their memes are fairly hilarious, and they are prolific at making them. There are constantly new memes. So if you are really into Dune and sarcasm and tongue-in-cheek humor, then you might really enjoy that Facebook group. Oscar Isaac has described the new Dune as being nightmarish, brutalist, shocking, very visceral, but also that he thinks it's very well suited for the tone in the original novels by Frank Herbert. So we're going to see how that plays out. I think Dune is already kind of nightmarish on its own with the concepts of these giant worms and just the sheer horror of Baron Harkonnen as a person and as a concept, and him having so much power, and how there are a lot of very powerful governmental figures in the real world who are depraved like him. They just have enough money to pay people off, whereas in Dune, everybody knows Baron Harkonnen is a freak, but he doesn't have to pay anybody off because it's an oligarchy. So the next thing we're going to talk about here in Dune is they said that they're trying to honor the spirit of the original Dune. So I'm excited about that. He's trying to honor what Frank put into the novels, and that's going to look different to everyone. Especially as sci-fi fans, we have very specific ideas of what we want something to look like and how we want it to make us feel. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. We need to definitely draw a line at not bullying people for it. Just because we don't like a character doesn't mean that we have to go off on the actors or the new writers or anything about that. It should never be personal. They were not trying to make it something we didn't want, but it's okay to not like something. It's okay for it not to fit your vision, but just keep in mind it fits somebody else's, and we're not all going to like the same things. That's okay. It is being shot though by the Rogue One cinematographer, Greg Fraser, So I'm excited to see how that goes. I did not think I was going to like Rogue One. I had a lot of problems with the original trailer and some of the dialogue in it. But then when I watched the movie, they had actually cut out all of the things that I didn't like. And the cinematography was very beautiful for that movie. So I'm kind of psyched for Greg Fraser to be doing that. They said that this one's also going to be more grounded and visceral. They were kind of comparing that to Blade Runner 2049. So all that neon, it's going to look a lot different for Dune, as it should. I'm really excited for that. It's supposed to open later this year. We're going to see. Dune has a habit of when it is made of being pushed back a little bit, and we could be in for a heck of a ride as long as it gets finished being made. So we know a couple things going forward. The cast is fairly sorted out at this point. So in addition to Chalamet and Oscar Isaac, we're also looking at Rebecca Ferguson to play the Lady Jessica, and Jason Momoa is going to be Duncan Idaho. Very interesting choice. I'm excited to see where he goes with that. I loved him on Baywatch when I was a kid. I loved him in Stargate Atlantis as Ronan Dex. I love Jason Momoa in pretty much everything, much like I think the rest of the world. So seeing him as Duncan Idaho, he's not the first person who jumped to my mind when they were going to be casting Duncan, but I'm stoked to see what this looks like. I'm sure that Denis really has a good idea of what he wants, and I am so excited that it's not something that necessarily would have come to my mind, because this is just going to be a totally new experience. Zendaya is going to be Chani, and Dave Bautista, who played Drax on Guardians of the Galaxy and in the Avengers, he is playing the Beast Raban. Josh Brolin is Gurney Halleck, and Javier Bardem is going to be Stilgar. So they have a really solid cast for this. There are a lot more actors, but I didn't want to just read you guys the screen crawl from the end of movies for the rest of the podcast. So we're going to stop with those main characters and go from there. I've not seen any mention of Alia at this point, so I don't know if we're going to have a young Alia or if that's just supposed to be a big surprise. I guess we'll see. Who knows? But maybe this time Jessica bore no daughters at all. Not even one. The Bene Gesserit's going to be really mad at her. I mean, she was already supposed to bear only daughters, and she messed up with Paul. But if she has no daughters, I don't understand where they would be going with that. So we're just going to see. But the Reverend Mother, who would be expressing the most displeasure about this, is being played by Charlotte Rampling. So Charlotte Rampling, you have probably seen her before she was in Red Sparrow. So if you are into action movies, she also played Ellen Kay in Assassin's Creed in 2016. And she was in Broadchurch. So if you guys are into other genres other than sci-fi, then you might have seen her in some of those. Now, I know everyone is probably still bummed that we never got Jodorowsky's Dune, but we can watch the documentary on it and imagine what might have been. I think one of my favorite comments I've ever seen on the internet, though, is on Jodorowsky's Dune trailer, where somebody said, "Your movie is too weird. We're going to let David Lynch do it so that it makes more sense." Yeah, I mean, that's what happened. They thought that it was too strange. They were freaked out by his imagination, and so they let David Lynch do it. David Lynch's Dune is definitely not as bizarre of like an acid trip as Jodorowsky was going to do, but I think that each of them have their own merit and stand on their own, and I am very excited to see what Denis does with his. All right, we're going to go on another quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about Stargate, one of my all-time favorites.
The GSMC Life and Happiness podcast takes you on a journey of exploration. We'll discuss tried and true methods alongside the latest trends of how to best live your life to its fullest and happiest. From psychology to meditation, science to self-help books, the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast will help you to discover what makes you happy and how you can live life being the best you possible. Download the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back. In our last segment, we were talking about the new Dune that should be coming out this next year. Fingers crossed that we get to keep it this year. Now we're going to talk a little bit about Stargate. So I'm sure everyone's heard of Star Wars and Star Trek. And I mean, this is a sci-fi podcast. You guys are probably already familiar with Stargate. But for anyone who is not, Stargate was a movie by Roland Emmerich that came out in 1994, and there was supposed to be a sequel to that, but then there were two partners involved. One of them stole the money and used it to make this little indie film called Independence Day that kind of blew up after it had the budget for it. So the Stargate sequel did not get made. However, Brad Wright and Robert C. Cooper also were interested in Stargate as a story, and they were able to start a TV show for it. So it started with Stargate SG-1 in 1998 with Richard Dean Anderson, one of my all-time favorite men who have ever graced this planet. And he also was a producer on the show. He was an executive producer, and they put together this little show on this, it wasn't an insignificant budget, but, they were filming it in Vancouver, and a lot of it was just outdoors, and that's why all the planets that they visit look like British Columbia. But it was a really heartwarming show, even though it was about the military and fighting aliens, because a lot of it centered around the team. So unlike Star Trek The Next Generation, Stargate doesn't do a lot of character-centric episodes. They do have character-centric episodes, but they are kind of few and far between, and you don't get to see a lot of their personal downtime. So you don't really know what a lot of the characters' hobbies are beyond what they say that they are. A big thing in the 90s was to show the background of what some of the characters were doing. So TV shows, especially the military ones like JAG, would use some background stories or holiday stories to kind of lighten it up. But that didn't really happen with Stargate. And I think part of that is because they did have military advisors from the Air Force, specifically because the characters were supposed to be in the United States Air Force. And they would get their scripts approved by the Pentagon. So they had to make sure that they were portraying the military in a very positive light. And a lot of that meant that plot lines, especially romantic ones, they couldn't really go down that path. These are back in the day with Don't Ask, Don't Tell and all that jazz. So no matter whether you are a Jack and Daniel shipper or a Jack and Sam shipper, neither of the characters that you wanted to be in that pairing were going to be able to be together. So it has a lot of tension in that way. And if you like your sci-fi without a ton of romance, Stargate may be for you. If you also like shows that don't do a lot of exposition, so they don't sit there and just explain out what's going to happen like they did in Star Wars The Force Awakens. Like if they said that Ben was Han Leia's son one more time, my head was going to explode. It's like, I get it already. I get it. Like I figured it out on my own. And now also you've told me like 3 times in 3 different ways from different characters. So one of the things I like about Stargate is it doesn't hit you over the head. It expects you to figure some things out on your own. And some of the storytelling is also more related to what goes unsaid. and the music. So you have to pay attention to the music that's used. They have recurring themes and different musical elements for these characters. They don't go so far as like Peter and the Wolf, but you know from what's happening the underlying motives that some of the characters have. I don't want to get too far into it without possibly spoiling it for you, but we might get further into it in a future Stargate-related episode. Two of my favorite things about this show, though, are that it has such wholesome masculinity. So they are running around with P90s, shooting aliens and stuff. They do kill the aliens in Stargate. They have absolutely no qualms about that. But that's part of their job. Their job is, as a unit, as a team, to go through this portal that is connected to a wormhole. It's a stabilized wormhole, and they could travel to other planets, and they're trying to stop these evil aliens from conquering and enslaving all of these other people. So as they do that, they're trying to find more allies, they're trying to find technology, and they're trying to ultimately stop the evil aliens called the Goa'uld. This show lasted, SG-1, for 10 years, and then after that, it had also running concurrently, was Stargate Atlantis, 5 seasons, and Stargate Universe, 2 seasons. There have been, there's a cartoon we don't talk about, much like the female Ninja Turtle Venus. Everybody pretends that that didn't happen because the tone was very different from it. And there's also been a web series since then. Stargate, much like Star Wars, has a very expanded universe. Not as expanded as Star Wars, but there are a whole bunch of different books about what happens afterwards, including in Stargate Atlantis, and there are comics that tie them in. You can find some online. I know that Stargate Command was hosting it for a while, but I think that the comics might have gone offline when all the TV shows did as well in the beginning of December this last year. Made me really sad. I was a day one supporter of Stargate Command. We're trying to bring Stargate back. But at least we got, a new Stargate Origins. So there are a lot of mixed reviews on Stargate Origins. For me, I think that if you are okay with like how Star Treks are different with each iteration, like the feel of them and everything, if you like those and you like comedies, so The Mummy specifically, and some of the more shtick comedy from Indiana Jones, then I think that you might like this one. Maybe. I would still definitely watch anything else that Stargate puts out. I'm a diehard Stargate fan. This was not what I expected, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. I just think it's geared more towards, not necessarily kids, but it's just geared towards a different generation, and it has a different feel to it. So Stargate and Stargate Atlantis were more humorous, and Universe didn't go over well because it was darker. It was more like Battlestar Galactica in that way. But this goes the entire opposite direction. So it's more humor-based. So if you were wanting it to be more lighthearted than any of the other Stargates, this might be the Stargate for you. We don't know if they're going to get to make any more. Roland Emmerich has never given up really on wanting to make more movies, sequels. There are also, all the Stargate actors are willing to do it. They would do a limited series run, so they all have other projects now. Amanda Tapping, in particular, is doing a lot of directing for sci-fi shows. So you've probably seen some of her fight scenes in Dark Matter and Travelers. She does extensive work at this point, in especially choreographing fight scenes, it seems. I've about gotten to the point where I can look at it and go, is this an Amanda Tapping episode? Because she does have a distinct style that she's developed over the years, and I'm so excited to see that because she started with her first directed episode on Stargate. And I believe it was the episode that Michael Shanks wrote, Revelations, I want to say. So they're all doing different things. Christopher Judge, who is one of my favorite actors as well, he is now the voice of Kratos in God of War. So if you guys are big God of War fans, you might recognize Teal'c's voice in there. He does a fantastic job. and I'm so stoked to see everyone doing so well for themselves at this point. Now, if you are going to start watching Stargate and you haven't seen it before, I have 2 recommendations that generally work for most people. A lot of people I found get stuck on the very first episode, Children of the Gods. It's a 2-part episode. It's really there to help show you guys how the team is formed, so I would stick through it. And then if you are not really into that and you just want to get into the part where they all know each other really well, you can skip to season 2, or you could start at season 4. Season 4 is one of my favorites, but I wouldn't want you guys to go too far in that. Because like the characters really, they really develop a lot over the years. They do a great job on that show with character development. So Jack in season 1 is not the same Jack in season 4 by the time you get there. Same actor, but he's had such emotional growth as he's gone along. And it's amazing to see how each of the characters have their own interpersonal relationships with the entire group of 4, with each other one-on-one, etc. They're truly unique and really fleshed out. So what I would recommend is start with Children of the Gods if you're going to start in season 1, just to see how the teams form. Then watch Broke a Divide because you're going to be a shipper and you just don't know it yet. Episode 14, plot development. Episode 15 and 18 for character development. Episode 19 because there's a later callback to it, but you can skip it if you don't want to watch it. It's kind of a one-off, like a Monster of the Week kind of thing. Like how the X-Files used to do that. It's not technically monsters. I'm not spoiling anything. But there's just one later callback in a couple of seasons. And then episode 20 for plot development and a callback. And episodes 21 and 22 for plot development. We're going to go on a quick break real quick. But when we come back, we are going to be talking about some lessons learned from sci-fi.
The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast, the show that gives you advice on everything travel. We explore places you've always wanted to go, as well as giving tips for traveling in those places. We'll give you advice on the best sites for travel tips, information, and discounts. Join us as we travel the world, explore cultures, and meet new people. The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast has got you covered. Download the GSMC Travel Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Excited to talk to you guys some more about some lessons that sci-fi has taught me personally over the years, and I'm really interested to hear about the lessons it's taught to you guys. I know a lot of us grew up watching these, and sometimes it was, a family event or a family tradition. A lot of us watched it with one or more parents, and it was like our personal bonding time. And in that way, it also helped shape us because we were sitting there watching these stories about they had morals in them. So, about not trying to go too far in changing a person, or with Geordie LaForge in TNG about not falling in love with just the idea of a person, like he did with Dr. Leah Brahms, and he made that holodeck replication of her. And he kind of falls in love with her without really knowing her. And then he meets her in real life. And she's kind of abrasive and they don't quite get along. And he's all confused because he didn't really like her. He liked the idea of her. So I really enjoyed learning about that, about accepting people as they are and not getting too far into your own head when you're, thinking about whether you have a crush on somebody and stuff like that, how your feelings shape how you think of a person. As a woman, seeing Samantha Carter on screen was also a really big deal for me as a little girl. And Stargate helped show me there's more than one way to be a strong woman. So the approach that Sam takes is different from the approach that Janet takes, which is different from the approach that Vala takes later on. They're all very different, but they are all strong in their own ways. And I like that they didn't really pit the women against each other. they were friends in that. A lot of times, especially in the 90s, that was a big trope where if there were multiple women, they were not going to get along with each other. So that was really nice to see. And I really like how much effort, especially Amanda Tapping, put in to making sure that Samantha Carter was someone that young girls could look up to and that she wasn't overly sexualized. But I also like that they let Vala be hypersexualized. That's just who Vala is. And so it's not condemning sexuality either way. It's just going, oh, hey, everybody can be different and we can still be friends. We can all get along in that way. I also learned a lot from Daniel. So I like to think of myself as the love child of Samantha Carter and Daniel Jackson, even though I ship Sam and Jack, but that's neither here nor there. Daniel taught me to take a holistic approach to life, to anthropology, understanding people, and just how to view the world around me. Daniel has a really open heart, and a lot of times that does get them into trouble. So you do have to kind of temper that in a lot of ways. And Sam, she does that. And she also approaches problems in a similar manner to Daniel. They're both very curious people. They come at it from like a scientific perspective, and they both want to believe better of people. But Sam is also military. She's not just a scientist. And so she's also very pragmatic, and she shares a lot of qualities with the other male leads, Jack and Teal'c. And I like that highlighting it that way gives each of them very different relationships with each other. So I like watching episodes that have Sam and Teal'c's friendship centered just as much as the science twins, which is what I like to think of Daniel and Sam as. And also with how she interacts with Jack and how all the other characters interact with each other. With all that wholesome masculinity, you see some of the characters, male characters as well, crying on each other, comfort each other when they're going through terrible things like withdrawal or death, or another one being injured or missing. It's very nuanced in how they pick who gets to react with each other in different ways, and I really appreciate that. It taught me a lot about hermeneutics and quality writing. So before I watched Stargate, and even when I watched it as a kid, I hadn't thought much about the importance of what's left unsaid or not shown, and that perspective has really changed as I've watched it again as an adult. And it's changed how I view media in general. Stargate has been very formative for me in that way. Not just television, but also writing and music. So sometimes it's about the spaces in between and what you choose not to say or show that's really important. So I think that that's really influenced me getting into electronic grime and music production and artists like Sophie from the UK, where it is about partly the spaces in between. And it sounds awkward and disjointed at first, but if you view the rest notes and everything as also part of the music, then you get a very different picture sometimes than just focusing on the parts that you hear. So I really enjoyed that. I also enjoy how sci-fi in general has taught me a lot about logic and hard choices. So from sci-fi, I learned that sometimes there's no good choice, but a decision still has to be made. So you just have to go with your best choice, and sometimes your best choice is still awful. And in life, crappy things happen to people, and how you deal with it is going to be highly variable based on who you are as a person and your circumstances and your capabilities. And I don't know, I just think it's really important to keep that in mind, where we can't let ourselves get frozen in the moment by not making a decision. You still have to make it. Jack makes a lot of really difficult decisions in Stargate, and that's one of the reasons that I really like him in comparison with starship captains, is the way that he makes decisions, when he rationalizes things, what he chooses to do when his people's lives are at stake. He makes the hard decisions, and sometimes there is no good choice, just the best choice. That's one of the top 2 lessons, I think, that I learned from sci-fi. So that one I learned from Stargate, but it's right up there with my second one, And these are not in rank order. It would be too hard to decide that. But Captain Picard's "it is possible to commit no mistakes and still lose" has always been very meaningful to me. So sometimes you go and you apply for a job and you don't get it. And you did everything right. You had all the qualifications. You even exceeded the qualifications, but somehow you still didn't get it. That's not about you. You did everything right and you can still lose. That is not a failure. That is life. And it helped me a lot with learning how to accept things when they don't go my way. It doesn't mean I need to beat myself up about it. There might not even actually be anything I can improve upon, although my first go-to is to see what I can fix. But you could do everything right and you can still lose. And it sucks, but it's okay. And you will bounce back from it. So those are both very dear to me, and they help me take one on the chin from life with my head still held high. Speaking of Picard, I am very stoked about Star Trek Picard coming up January 23rd, y'all. Sir Patrick Stewart, loves pit bulls, and I think it's really cool that they have one in the show now, especially since, close your ears if you are trying not to watch any of the trailers. I'll give you 1, 2, 3, 4 seconds. All right, its name is Number 1, and I think that's hilarious. But I'm very stoked about how it looks like a heartwarming mix of some of our old favorites, with some more characters coming in and some daring new plot lines. So here in about 10 days, don't call me. I'm going to be watching Star Trek Picard. Well, guys, that's all we have for today. Thank you so much for listening to the GSMC Sci-Fi Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'd like to ask that you guys please remember to subscribe to the show, and writing a nice review always really helps us. Also, if you could please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, I'd appreciate it, and then I can also hear what y'all have to think about this stuff. Thank you kindly, and have a great night.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.